Welcome to Service and Sacrifice. This is Justin.
This is Anthony.
And today we're going to be talking about some topics around the civilian transition and what nobody tells you. Anthony, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, let's talk about the worst advice that you got when you were leaving the military, whether that is when you went to go see the retention officer, whether it was related to TAP or whatever it's called now or then, or, after you got out talking to people that you knew, your family, other friends, civilians that you reconnected with. Could have been from them too.
Yeah, let's touch on retention first. So you guys left like 8 months before, no, I think like 8 months before my ETS date. You guys all went to, just say the Middle East so no one's like OPSEC in the comments. OPSEC for this.
Someone's gonna say it anyways.
Anyway, so I went to retention. I think they make you go. I don't even remember, but I remember like Rear D First Sergeant being like, hey, time to go to retention. And I was like, okay. And keep in mind, I was like 90-10, 90, no way you're getting me to reenlist. But also, the unit gives you the typical like scare tactics. Like, what are you going to do? It's so hard without someone telling you when you can go to the bathroom. Like, so I went to retention. It was this E6 female in the adjacent building. And I'm surprised she even offered me anything because, like, I didn't have the best reputation. Like, I don't know. I just wasn't overly enthusiastic about things. So I expected, like, my unit to tell her that. And she was like, well, we don't want someone who's not enthusiastic about serving. She didn't care at all. It's numbers. So
you
list.
You didn't know her.
No clue who she was. Never met her.
She was
before.
at like brigade level or something, so you'd never seen her before.
Nope. And so they presented like 6 or 7 options. There was the same MOS I was currently doing, 13 Mike. And I was like, don't want to do that because points were maxed at 798 for like a year, which means like you're never getting promoted to sergeant. 2, there was 11 Bravo infantry. I was like, why on earth would I switch into infantry, right? MP 13 Bravo, which was the cannon artillery. I think that was it. And then this other position, which they actually recently changed the name of it, but it used to be Surge Tech, Surgical Technician 68 Delta. It's now called Operating Room Specialist. Like the same as if you're going into surgery in the civilian world and the person who just sets up the equipment for the doctor. Do you remember what your options were, or how did your retention story begin?
Well, I already had an idea of something that I wanted to do. So I was more like 50-50 going in, because what my plan was when I got out was a really dumb plan. I was gonna go
McDonald's?
No. I had planned, I wanted to do geological engineering, because I was, again, chasing the money again. That's what I wanted to do. I was like, what can I do when I get out that isn't going to be sitting in an office all day that is going to make a lot of money? And I somehow landed on geological engineering. And I was like, I'm going to go to college in Hawaii because they have a program that does that, and I'd be in Hawaii. And then I was like, I wonder if I could like get some of the certifications or whatever by going to a guard unit and being like retrained under that MOS. And when I went to the retention office, that happened to be something that was available, I thought. So I signed the paperwork for it. The retention officer was like, yeah, this is a great career move for you. We'll find you somewhere in California that's close to where your family lives, so you won't have to drive real far. Yeah, let's sign you up. And so I went through with it, and then I ETS, got back home, and they told me, like, after your terminal leave ends, you have 30 days to report to your new unit so that you can be reclassed. And so it started getting close to that time, and I'm like, I'm just going to try the phone number that they gave me on the paperwork just to make sure I can get through. And I called and the number was disconnected. And so I was like, oh, okay, maybe they didn't have the up-to-date information. So I went and started looking for the phone number for this unit. And in the process of that, I found out that that unit not only didn't exist, but it had been deactivated for 3 years. So then that triggered a whole other situation where people from the guard had to get in contact with me and they're like, well, we're just going to have to reassign you to another unit. No, they were going to keep it the same MOS, but the unit that they were going to sign me up to, one, was a 9-hour drive from where I was going to be living, and two, was going to be deploying in 30 days. And I would have had to go. And I had just started a new civilian job. And so that turned into a whole other can of worms.
Yeah.
So long story short, yeah, I signed up for a unit that didn't exist and then they tried to force me into something else that didn't work for me at all.
Yeah, that's a very interesting story that we'll get back. Um, So like I said, I went to the retention NCO. She presented me these 6 options. The only ones that I was semi-considering were the surge tech. I was like, maybe MP, like maybe, but like, eh. And then I didn't want to stay 13 Mike because I was like, I can't get promoted. I don't want to be like a 5 or 6 year specialist. Like I just didn't want to do that. So I think you had to go back like every week or something, or every 2 weeks. I don't know. But currently the unit was overseas. I didn't have to go because I think you needed 10 plus months left in contract in order to be forced. And I had like 7 or 8. So I could have gone if I volunteered. And then I would have had to extend for like a few months while, the time dragged over. But I didn't like that unit. I didn't like my platoon sergeant. I didn't like my first sergeant. I didn't like the BC. And I was like, why on earth would I re-enlist to spend 1 year even closer to them? Right? I don't want to see these people anymore. So I stayed on Rear D, which is like, I feel like Rear D is a hidden gem in the Army because it was sick. It was sick. Your NCOs who were in charge were either getting out, waiting to PCS to Korea, or were like super hurt and had to heal, so they couldn't deploy. Point is, you were not working very hard, and all your command was overseas. Like, I was like, this is sick. I'm going to chill for 8 months and then get out. So anyway, I go back to the retention NCO like 2 weeks later, same exact options. I was like, I really like the sound of surge tech. You would have been working in the hospital in scrubs. So you wouldn't be wearing your uniform all day. You wouldn't be in the field for 2 weeks in the hottest time of the year and then the coldest time of the year. You don't have like unit PT, which I hated because like everyone was just like, we're gonna run 6 miles because I'm genetically a runner and that's what I'm good at, and I'm gonna make you guys do it. And all it did was end up hurting people because you're not supposed to run that much. I don't care what anybody says. You're not supposed to be. The average person cannot be running 5+ miles 3 times a week. It's just not good. So you would have had to do PT on your own, and I was like, sick. I'll run, I'll go to the gym, and then I'll just show up in scrubs. Nobody's yelling at you. I highly doubt in the hospital, unless you're in like a more stressful position, people were insulting us the way we were insulted back in the motor pool. So I told the retention NCO, I was like, I want this. I will seriously consider re-enlisting for 3 years if I can do this. And at the time it was full because, for those of you that don't know, you would think they'd want us to stay in and give us the first picks, but civilians got the first pick. So like if somebody in New York or Boston was like, I want to be a 68 Delta, they're like, we're going to give it to this new person because we already have Justin in the Army. We want a new person in, opposed to just giving it to me first. So long story short, the entire 7 months, every like 3 to 4 weeks, I'd ask this NCO, hey, is 68 Delta open? And she would say, nope. And I'll tell the next part of the story after. What happened with your guard unit that didn't exist?
So then, it turned into a bunch of email communication back and forth with some first sergeant and E7 that I'd never heard of in my entire life. They didn't know who I was. I didn't know who they were. And I'm not gonna lie, I was being difficult to a certain degree because I was upset that my plans were now completely obliterated. I would give them whatever they asked for document wise, but what I ended up telling them, I said, look, my family is in this other state right now. I'm in another state. There's a lot of issues going on, and I can't be part of this unit that's about to deploy, let alone have to drive 9 hours or whenever mandatory training is. And so what they decided to do was give me a hardship discharge. And so the contract ended up being null and void. And then I was just placed on IRR for the remaining 2.5 years or whatever was left at that point.
Did they give you options to change MOS?
They did, but I had already made up my mind and laid out all these plans to do one thing. And I wasn't even interested in hearing about anything else. That just kind of made it seem like, okay, well, the Army can't even do this simple thing correct. So why would I trust that another scenario that is being presented to me will go smoothly or in the way that it's being presented? So I was just ready to wash my hands of it completely.
Yeah, that's a fair statement. So going back to finish up this retention story, 68 Delta was not an option. Like literally like 6-8 weeks before ETSing, she was just like, it's just not going to open. And so I was like, oh, that sucks. I decided I didn't want to do MP, mostly based off of like everyone just saying MPs were Blue Falcons, and like I had a bad experience with an MP where he pulled me over on base because I did a rolling stop. Technically, a complete stop is when you press on your brakes and your car does that kind of like rocking motion, right? From like the gravity. And I pressed the brakes. I looked left and right. There's no cars. So I just continued. I was a pretty big smartass. And he was like, well, you know what? In my defense, he started it. So he pulled me over and he was like, do you know what the definition of a complete stop is? And I said, I left my dictionary at home. And, needless to say, my platoon sergeant was immediately contacted and I got the shit smoked out of me. But that left like a bad, and I heard like so many people from the unit being like, I was pulled over for going 3 over, which like, who cares, dude? Who cares? It's 3. So I was like, I just don't want to do this. So I was like, you know what? I really wanted to go to Fort Lewis in Washington. I heard good things about it. Never been to the West Coast. I was like, screw it. I'll do another 3 years. I know that unit, the 13 Mike unit at Washington, frequently deploys. I forgot which unit it is. But basically, and I always wanted...
I was actually there. It's 194, 1st of the 94th Field Artillery Battalion.
Sounds familiar. I know they were on like an every year deployment type of thing. At least that's what one of the corporals told me who transferred from there. And I worked into my contract because I really wanted to go to Korea. I've heard 50-50 split. I know people who got back from Korea and they were like, best thing they ever did in the Army. Kept them from getting chaptered. They were getting, partying all the time. They had the chillest NCOs. And then the other 50% was like, they were like, it sucked. I got demoted. I got, beat up outside of base. Either way, I wanted to go to another country. So I worked into my contract. I'd reenlist as 13 Mike. I would then go do a year in Korea. I would then come back and finish the remaining 2 years in Lewis. And I was like, sick, that's fine. I'm out of this unit. I'll get my overseas deployment and then I'll go to Lewis and they'll probably deploy to the Middle East. They got that written up. I left the office and she was like, okay, I'll let you know when it's done and then you sign it. So check out what happens. I don't know what the secret plan was behind closed doors. I don't know if the retention NCOs are instructed to call your first sergeant when you leave, and it sounds like it's a sure thing to be like, oh, yep, we got him, he's enlisting. Or if my first sergeant just like really had it out and called her when my appointment was going to be done. In the 5-minute walk back to the next building, like adjacently next building, I walked upstairs to my unit and the rear D first sergeant and BC were like, Wellickson, get over here. And he was like, hey, heard you're re-enlisting to go to Korea and Lewis. And I was like, Roger. And he was like, well, we're going to override those orders and you're going to go with the unit, currently you guys, in the Middle East and finish off like 5 or 6 months or 4 months. I don't know what it was. And then you'll go to Korea and Lewis. And he had this smile where he was like, I gotcha. And I was like, oh, well, top I didn't officially sign yet, and now I'm not going to. So I was just like, I'm just gonna get out.
You know what's interesting about that, though? Because we were both in the same unit, I was in the Middle East when you were having this conversation. What ended up happening with me is I came back after, like 2 months had gone by. We had had our our R&R period and got everything unloaded and back in the motor pool and all that good stuff. My first sergeant pulls me into the office and he's like, guess what? You're on a list to go to Korea and you're leaving in 3 months. And so
Wait, this
I
was
did,
3 months after you got back?
yes. So
Continue.
I go to Korea and I find out while I'm there that my follow on duty station is Lewis. And so I went to Lewis after that.
Bro, we
And
would have been,
then
did you go to Camp Casey?
I did, yeah.
We would have been at Casey, and then we would have gone to the same unit at Lewis together.
And then from Lewis, right when Lewis was my last year that I was in. So right when I was hitting my like somewhere between 3 and 6 months before I would have been going on terminal leave. The battalion commander, well, I was working at battalion level. They had pulled me out of the typical 13 papa slot in MOS, and they had put me in the S2 or the intel shop at battalion, which was the chillest job ever. It was
Dude,
me.
dirtbag us too.
It was me and E5, who was like one of those people that is like, oh, how are you even in the army? He'd be like, yeah, what's up, dude? Check it out, man. Like, we're not gonna do anything today, so you can just like leave and go back to your room or whatever if you're cool with that. And I was like, yes, I am cool with that.
That sounds incredible.
And then his boss was a chief warrant officer too, who was like, again, one of the chillest people, more serious, but he was the kind that would just leave and go fishing in the middle of the day. And no one would ask where he was or what he was doing. Yeah. Anyways, that was a wonderful experience all around. But then again, back to the 4 to 6 month period or 3 to 6 months. So because I'm working at battalion level, like I see the battalion commander all the time. And because I'm at an S2, I talk to him all the time. And he was like, hey, come here. And he like pulls me into his office and he's like, so we're actually going to be deploying to a certain place where you'll actually get to do your job for real. If you're in this MOS that Justin was as a 13 Mike and me as a 13 Papa, that is the one thing that you want to do. But because the destructive power of the munitions that these launchers hold is so enormous, they almost never get used unless it's an offense. There's specific large targets identified that need to be destroyed. That's the only time that you're going to see it used. Well, this was that kind of scenario. And so the battalion commander's like, just so you know what's happening. And if you want to go, you can extend and you can go. And we want you to go. And I was like, I don't want to go. I'm ready to be done. But it's just interesting because if you had just stayed in the unit you were in, you would have literally gotten exactly what you wanted as part of that reenlistment package. You would have fired live rounds downright.
Yeah, I would have gone to the second half of your guys' deployment. I would have gone to Korea, and then this third. So it would have been 3 deployments in like 3 years. Even though like Korea's non-combat, whatever. Honestly, like looking back on it, it wouldn't have even been that bad to like join you guys for 4 months. Like I would have been there. We would have, from what I've heard, like I would have joined right when you guys were like deconstructing everything and packing up, which would have been so stupid from like a logistics standpoint to send more staff for a for 16 weeks left of a deployment. And then being a launcher crew member and firing a live round is like every 13 mic stream, because all we do in training is fire like metal telephone poles because you could like decimate a whole village. Yeah, it's I was just so pissed that like they were being sneaky about it and like, oh, we got you for 3 more years. If they had just been like, if he had just been like, oh, hey, like you're going to go to Korea and Lewis, but like you have to, it's out of my control. Like you have to, but he was like, I'm going to make you go. And I was like, well, I think I'll take my chances in college. Considering my E4 at 3-year pay was like, I don't know, $1,200 biweekly. I wasn't like rolling in the money. So I was like, I'm just gonna get out and work at like any retail job and do significantly better.
Man, I don't know about you, but I was broke constantly in the
Oh yeah.
army.
Oh yeah. You know what I did? My buddies who smoked, because everybody in the military either smokes or dips. I'd give them like little loans, right? So like my buddies who would blow through, they'd blow through their paychecks because our paychecks sucked and they needed cigarettes and shit. I'd be like, sure, I'll give you $20 so you could get a couple packs of cigarettes, but like you have to give me 25 next on my paycheck. And this wasn't meant to be like whoa, you're like collecting interest on your friends. I didn't have it either. It was tough for me to give out $20. I was like, hey, it's win-win. It's only $5 and we'll make it work. And like, it pretty consistently, like I was making like 10 extra bucks a paycheck or something like that. But we can move to our next topic here, which is we got worst advice we got when leaving the military and struggles with dealing with civilian cultures and civilian jobs like that.
Yeah, so we talked about this a little bit in our last episode we did. The process of getting your disability rating was actually not as bad as I thought it was going to be. The worst part of it was waiting, because it took about 9 months for my claim to be processed, and you're sitting there wondering, you're like, oh man, is it going to come back at 10? Is it going to come back at 30? I hope it's more than that. Is it going to be 50? Waiting was the worst part in my experience. But what I did is I went and found a VSO and got them to help me with everything after I had my medical evaluation done. So if I hadn't done that, it probably would have gone much worse. How was your experience with that?
Yeah, mine was totally different. I went in with next to no expectations. I was like, I'm probably not going to get anything. Well, I knew I was going to get a little something because I had surgery on my foot, which meant you get, I don't remember how it works, but you get a percentage for the surgery because like you got hurt. You get a percentage for the scar from the surgery because it's considered disfigurement. And then I think you also get a percentage just from like limitations of that limb or whatever. So I knew I'd get something. I figured it'd be bad though, but I didn't rely on it. I got out and just started working and went to school. I also had 54 days of terminal. So like I was getting paid my normal E4 crappy salary. Then I went to work immediately, like 1 week after getting back, I was working full time. And I gave myself a year off from school. So I was like, I know I want to go to school and use my GI Bill, but I need a break. So I'm going to give myself 12 months of just like to wind down a bit before I'm sitting in school with 18-year-olds. But yeah, I went to this medical facility off post, saw a civilian doctor. He did the typical thing, like he had a protractor and he was like putting it up to my shoulder and like doing that. And I just told him what hurt. And then I got a bunch of like MRIs and x-rays and that was it. Like I was like, I'll see what happens.
That's the one thing. I wonder if you could request MRIs, because I didn't get any, but I'm now dealing with issues that nothing shows up on x-rays for.
Oh yeah. I 100% request MRIs because x-rays show like bone damage, but MRIs show like joint and ligament damage. And so unless your bone, I mean, I'm not a doctor, I'm not an x-ray tech, but unless your bone is like physically broken or like something's chipped off, x-ray is just they're gonna be like, oh yeah, like it looks fine. But every time I got an MRI, they were like, oh yeah, this is like inflamed or it's being like the nerves being pinched. So I requested before I got out to have an MRI and x-ray on everything. And they did it. And then I also requested it to be on like a CD so I would have the images, which they would not do while I was in the Army. When you go to like sick call and they were like, oh, let's take an x-ray of your ankle. And I remember asking, because I had this plan, actually. I had this plan where I was going to show a civilian doctor off post a picture of the x-ray. And I wanted them to be like, oh yeah, your ankle's like not good. And then I'd have that proof from them that completely contradicts what the military was saying, because my doctor was a captain, some female captain who was a doctor. Dude, she just like did not care. I remember walking in one day after PT and I had like a golf ball size lump on my ankle, like very visible fluid. I would poke it. I took my sock off. I poked it and it like moved. I was like, look, I kept poking it. She was like, oh, it's just a little bit of swelling. It'll go down. And I'm like, there's a lot of swelling in there. Like that shit was gross. And after every single time they would examine things, they were like, yeah, no, ibuprofen and rest. But then the problem is you wouldn't ever rest because you were on your feet for 15 hours in the motor pool. You're jumping up and down from Humvees and LMTVs, or you're carrying like crazy heavy shit into the connexes. So you weren't ever resting.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because they would be like, okay, well, you don't have to do PT or you don't have to run, but then you still have to go to the motor pool and carry a 300-pound generator somewhere. Or you still have to get down out of the cab of your launcher that doesn't have steps that go all the way to the ground.
Yeah, every time I jumped out of a vehicle, I just felt like nerve pain, like sparking up through my ankle or knees or something. And I'm like, that can't be good. What about civilian culture? Any struggles with that upon getting out?
It really wasn't that bad for me because I enlisted later. I think I was 22 when I went to basic training. So, I had been working since I was 14, doing various different things. I had done some like blue collar stuff. I had done some retail. I had worked as an insurance agent, and the job that I had when I decided that I wanted to go into the military, I was doing cold call sales calls trying to sell businesses antivirus software. So to come out of the military and go back to a civilian job, I don't think that I really had any trouble adjusting to the culture, but there was definitely just something in the back of my mind that I don't know exactly how to describe it. After coming out of a scenario where you basically know what you're going to be doing every day, it becomes very routine. You know how much your paycheck is going to be every single month. There's no chance of you becoming homeless because you're not making enough money. You still have a place to live. I think the difficulty was adjusting and going, okay, it's all on me now. No one's going to bail me out. I have to make this work, and I have to budget my expenses. Otherwise, I will be living on the street. I think that was the more difficult part for me.
Yeah, I didn't really struggle with that aspect. It was more like it was difficult for me to, well, one, the work seemed less significant, right? Like, which is a common veteran thing. Like, how can you sit in an office and do paperwork in comparison to firing rockets and heavy machine guns and, doing close quarters combat in like fake villages and stuff. So I just remember sitting there and I was like, this is just so dumb in comparison, even though this is what I wanted for all 3 years, right? I was like, I just want to sit and do nothing at a dumb job and make more. And also, I had a big problem with other employees, like some regular civilian employees that just like didn't care, because in the Army, like even on your worst day of not caring and being unmotivated and, maybe talking back a bit, the job still got done 100%. Like if your NCO said it has to get done to this degree of efficiency in this order, that has to go there, this has to go there, you might have complained, but it got done.
The design in the military, time does not exist to a certain extent. So it doesn't matter to the person giving you the task how long it takes you necessarily. In a lot of instances, you will just continue to work on that task until it is done. And so that motivates you to complete said task as quickly as possible and to the specifications that were given to you so that you can leave and not do the stuff anymore. Whereas in the civilian environment, it's a little bit different.
Yeah, even though the majority of times in the military, no matter how fast we did it, they were like, all right, then sit in this office for 4 hours. But in the civilian world, if you put in 110% efficiency, there's another task waiting for you, and another and another and another. And like, it was difficult for me to watch coworkers around me just be like, because they already knew, I guess, what I hadn't figured out yet, which was like, you're here 8 hours regardless. Your pay is not going to fluctuate depending on how much work you do, unless you get like a raise or promoted. But to me, I was just like, how can you not take pride in what you're doing, right? Like I was viewing them as like the shitbag version of privates. I was like, oh, you're not putting any effort. And now being out for 10 plus years, I'm like, oh.
I mean, that's a fair point. I guess I did have some trouble understanding that as well. But honestly, that's what I'm going to say is the reason that I was able to transition and move up into responsibility as quickly as I did, because there was at least someone somewhere who was like, "Oh, okay, this person is actually going to try to do a good job and put a lot of effort into whatever they're doing."
Yeah, definitely pros to being excessively motivated and particular in how your work gets done. It was just hard to like adapt from that because, you know, one day you're in an environment where people are like screaming at you and insulting you and making you do like incredibly stupid things like moving all of this stuff from one storage unit to another 10 feet away because someone in like the S1 or S2 or whatever was like, oh, I'm going to reserve Connex 1234 Charlie for this stuff. And then some E5 was like, oh shit, 1234 Charlie's full. We got to move it, instead of just being like, hey, why don't you just do the paperwork for that empty one? And that's what a large part of like, I felt the 3 years was just doing stupid things that made no sense. But someone who was in charge of you, who just because they had a few chevrons or chevron on a rocker did not mean they were more intelligent by any means, making you
No.
do all this stupid stuff.
You know, when I was at Fort Sill in Oklahoma, near the end of it, we had gotten moved into some new barracks. I ended up staying in the barracks the entire time I was in. And it snowed, which was very uncharacteristic for that particular location in Oklahoma. And it snowed quite a bit. I want to say it was at least 3 or 4 inches. And so, of course, because it doesn't snow there, the whole base goes into a panic. All of a sudden, you know, we have to clear all the sidewalks and all this stuff. But because it doesn't snow, there are no snow shovels, there are no tools to clear the snow. And I happen to be on 24-hour duty that day. So for people that don't know, there is a rolling list. It could have been any day of the week, you know, Sunday through Sunday. And you would start what would be called CQ, or battalion staff duty, depending on what level. And you would just sit at a desk from 9 a.m. on whatever day you started all the way to 9 a.m. the next day. You couldn't go take a nap. You couldn't go to sleep. You had to stay at the desk. You were allowed to go and get food and come back, but that was it. And you would eventually be there with another person so that this desk or entry point was manned at all times. And I happened to be on that when it snowed. And the person in charge of me was like, "Hey, you need to go clear the sidewalk in front of the barracks. It's dangerous, slippery." And I was like, "Okay, can I get a shovel from somewhere to do this?" And they're like, "Oh, we don't have any shovels. Here's a push broom. Go sweep it off." And so I'm out there with a push broom, literally sweeping snow that has ice underneath, accomplishing nothing. And so what I ended up doing is flipping the broom over and using the handle to like hit the ice and break it up and scrape the snow away into piles so that I could then sweep it off the concrete. And that is what the military is like. There's no option to go back and say, this broom doesn't work, so I can't do it. Okay. All right. Cool. We're done. Yeah. All right.
Yeah,
No, that's
very
not.
innovative of you. But yeah, you're right. That's what it's like. You don't just like, it's not like in the civilian world where you go back to your boss or your team lead and you're like, this solution doesn't work. It's now your responsibility to provide another solution. In the army, they're just like, do it. Whether it works or not, figure it out. And then if you apply those strategies to your civilian job, it should excel you pretty quickly because your boss isn't hearing constant complaints and excuses of like, I can't figure it out, I can't do it, and all the other people who are just like not doing things on time or the same level of efficiency. You're outshining them, even if it is something as stupid as just transfer bashing ice to figuring out this client problem.
I actually have a picture somewhere that shows the broom propped up and what I'm doing. We'll have to drop that into the end of the video so you can see that this is a real thing that actually happened.
That's hilarious. It's also yeah, Fort still got real cold. I remember it being real cold, not necessarily snowing a lot, but being very cold and then having like 40 to 60 degree or mile an hour wind chill, which was
Oh
just
yeah.
brutal. And then they were like, "Hey, just in case we ever go to war with like Russia again, let's go out in the field for 2 weeks during this weather with our vehicles that have gaps in the doors and rips on the non-armored vehicles and the heaters suck." It's just like, why?
You know, something I thought of the other day that I wanted to ask you about. You know how we would go out there and they would be like, "All right, we're gonna jump." What did that process look like for you guys? I'm pretty sure you just drove to the next place and then that was it, and you could go back to watching videos on your phones if you managed to smuggle one into the field or whatever it was.
Oh yeah, yeah. You guys, because you guys had that like big tent where you had to set up like the little communications base, right? We didn't have any of that. We had our vehicles, and then maybe the platoon had like a little tent where some of like the leadership slept, and you'd have to like disassemble it. But for the most part, if they were like, "Hey, we're moving to this new location," you hop in the vehicle and you go. So it was nice. But that
Uh,
vehicle was tight though. It was not comfortable at all, especially not when you have your vest on and you're like slamming into the yoke and the doors here and your gunners there. Like it sucked.
yeah, I will say that at least, there was some room to be in a contained area and or close to a heat source where, you weren't jammed in right next to two other people. But I used to, oh man, I swear they did this on purpose. They would wait until like 2 in the morning and then be like, "All right, we were gonna jump top. All right, come on, let's go." And you're like, "Oh man, are you kidding me right now?" Because that means that all the cots have to get broken down. Everything has to get packed back up into bags. You gotta take all the radios that you've moved outside and move them back inside, which means that you have to reload all the encryption keys and everything. You gotta pack everything up in a trailer. You gotta collapse the tent. You gotta put it all away and then just go to some other ridiculous place that has no meaning and set it all up again. And by the time you're done, it's now time to get everything ready for breakfast. And so, yeah, you just never sleep.
The best part of all of that, the moving and the like shooting, so you're not at the same location in case the enemy finds you and all that nonsense, was our launchers could fire like I think like 200 plus miles away. I don't know. We're not
OPSEC,
dude,
OPSEC.
I'm like, oh my
No,
God.
that's publicly
Unless
available information.
it's on Google. It's on Google. But like unless we're firing, it's not like we're firing across the ocean to another country. Like you're firing, 70, 100 plus miles away. It would take hours in these countries that like don't have paved roads for the enemy to get in that general direction. And besides, the rockets moving so quick, they would just hear like boom, boom, and blow up. They're not going to be like, yeah, it's definitely like 100 miles that way. We're going to go find them right now. So the whole the whole idea of like packing up and moving and setting up a new base was so stupid.
Well, and especially for us, nothing was fired from our vehicle. They have no idea where we are. I'm sure
Yeah.
there's someone out there who can break this all down and explain why this method is the way to go. But in a situation where we were dealing with a country who had just as much technological advancement and had some way to track, a surface to air or surface to surface missile or rocket, maybe at the same time, how is moving a mile or two away going to help? You're now exposed and you're moving. Wouldn't it be easier for them to detect you while you're moving? I don't know.
Yeah, and the only protective measures that these vehicles had was we had one 240 Bravo on the roof that the section chief could just pop open the hatch, making himself blatantly visible to any sniper. And he would just hop on the machine gun and like hopefully defend the vehicle as I'm moving 35 to 40 miles an hour.
Yeah,
I
and
don't know.
good luck because those tracked launchers, any kind of ditch or dip, the whole thing is just going, it's very extreme to watch what happens to a person who's up in the hatch of one of those things. They wouldn't be able to aim at anything.
No, no, it's incredibly rocky. Did your track ever fall off or break?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that happened one time in the 3 years I was in, and it was like a muddy ditch, and I guess like the sludge just like got stuck and the track fell off, and it was
That was your launch. I have a picture of that.
I don't remember when it was,
Picture of it.
but it sucked because like nobody helped. The guys in the Humvees or other people weren't like, hey, let's get this vehicle operational as quickly as possible. They were like, no, you three in the track fix it. And it took like 4 hours. And you're essentially just like in the mud, sledgehammering this track back on. And I just remember thinking at like 20 years old, I'm like, man, if this happened in like Iraq or Afghanistan and we were completely vulnerable, where's the assistance? all the crusty E7s and E8s are like, train how you fight. It's like, so you would just leave us unattended? Like,
Now,
but yeah.
there's definitely it's interesting how ambiguity levels increase and decrease based on what the situation is that's happening. So, train how you fight isn't a definite if there's mud involved or it's cold.
If I don't have to get dirty in the winter, I guess. Yeah. Yeah, that was not fun. Only happened one time. I mean, as the driver, because there were three positions. There was driver who drove and then did all the maintenance on the vehicle, like PMCS, fixing things. And then there's the gunner, which is an odd name because he's not actually on the physical gun. He's just on the little computer screen in the middle, who essentially just gets the message from you guys. And then he's like, hey, you sure we should fire now? And you guys are like, yes. And then he just flips the switch out. And then there's a section chief who makes sure you two are doing your job and then hops on the gun. So like as the driver, I had to do all the shit work. I was the one fixing the difficult, dirty things on the track.
Yeah, putting a track back on a tracked vehicle is the worst. The worst. I bet you wish that you'd gone to Lewis. You could have been in a wheeled version of the launcher.
Dude, the HIMARS came out literally as I was getting out. Like I remember within like three or 4 months of me ETSing, Fort Sill got like its first HIMARS or something. And it looked so cool. Like it had huge vehicles that had the run flats. So like if you blew your tire, you could at least inflate it enough to get to your location again. And then it had if you open the doors, there were the two seats and then like the captain's chair, like up top. So I was like, oh, this is way more room. The AC actually works. So yeah, never actually got to drive one though.
Definitely seemed to be enjoyed by the 13 mics at Lewis.
I don't know. I've heard bad things about Lewis though too, so I don't know how much I would have liked it, but certainly would have been cool because our MOS fields are super small. I'm assuming we have all the same duty stations. So like you run into people no matter where you go, like you're gonna see somebody you know from another unit.
It's changed now though. There's a 13 Juliet. So my version of things, you can be in a Canon unit or you can be in an MLRS or HIMARS unit. So that kind of opened up duty stations. But I don't know if 13 mic is still just 13 mic and nothing else.
I don't really know a lot of people that are still in to ask them anyway. But yeah, at the time, the duty stations sucked. When I was actually enlisting, they had Germany still. And like literally it was an option as I was going into basic. For some reason, I thought like you could just request it and your unit would be like, yeah, we'll send you to Germany. Not at all the case. But literally by the time I got out of AIT and I came back for like hometown recruiting 4 months later, they were like, oh yeah, Germany's removed. I'm like, oh cool. So now it's North Carolina, Texas, Oklahoma, and Washington and Korea. The majority of those duty stations suck.
Yes, I remember finding that out later, after I had already signed my contract and gone through MEPS and everything and found out that those were the only places you could go. And that was very disappointing news.
SIL had a bad reputation for just being SIL in the middle of nowhere. Bragg had not the best reputation because I guess that's where like the special forces units were. And they were like, this base is super high speed. They're going to be super strict. At least that's what I heard. I don't know if it was true. Korea was 50-50 for the most part. I heard good things about Lewis. And then there's two bases in Texas, right? There was, what were the two bases?
I thought there was only one. I thought it was just Fort Hood.
Oh, yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, Hood was the only base we could go to. And that was it. I didn't really want to go to Hood because, like, one state below Oklahoma, and I was like, I don't want to be anywhere in this vicinity. Like, get me out of the Midwest. But dude, honestly, one of the best MOSs you could have picked was Supply.
You can go anywhere.
Yeah, I knew Supply that was in Italy. And I was like, damn, dude, but I didn't pick that because I was like, that doesn't sound cool.
Yeah, if
But
there's
then you hear all the Supply guys order cool stuff and then keep it.
now, the advice that I give to people who are thinking about going into the military is
Don't do it.
exactly that. No, not don't do it. Think about it and be very sure and have a plan for what you want to do, with the intention of creating something for you after you're done that you can easily transition into and use the time that you're going to spend in the military to accumulate experience in whatever that thing is. Because you may tell yourself up front, I want to stay in, I'm going to do the full 20 years. Well, that's not always the case. You may not have the option to because something happens to you medically, or you might just decide that it's not for you. Have a plan. Pick something that can transfer to the civilian world.
You ever watch The Office?
I do, yeah.
Okay, you know that episode? You know that episode with Michael Scott where he's like giving his advice and he's like, don't ever that, you know that quote?
Which
just
one? I
reminded me-
feel like he's had a lot of those.
That just reminded me of like your speech to someone considering joining, and he's just like, don't ever do anything, ever. That might, like, I don't remember how it goes. He's like, ever do anything to anyone under any circumstances. Like, that's just you giving, it's like potential future soldier speech. I've written about this on the newsletter, but my opinion on what I would say to people has shifted drastically over the years, for multiple reasons. So like, if you would have asked me if I should join the first like 3 to 5 years after getting out, I'd be like, absolutely not. It sucked. Why would you? The pay is bad. You're away from your family and friends. The towns at the bases are not nice. It's not like you're like, oh, it's a Friday. Let's go out on the town. The town sucked. The towns were like, you got a good chance of getting stabbed at most of these towns, dude. And I was like, what? They're like, oh, but the benefits. I'm like, the benefit what? What the benefits? Crappy healthcare? But then, if you would have asked me like years 7 to 10 after getting out, it would have been much different. And then if you asked me years 10 to 13, it would be much more of a level-headed response, being like, what are you trying to do? I would tell someone to save as much money as possible. You don't need a car. Realistically, like, there were so many people I knew without vehicles, and like,
I didn't have
your
one.
sergeant,
the whole 5 years I
you're-
didn't have a vehicle.
yeah, your sergeant would like, you have to be picked up. It's not like they were like, find a way. They would just make your buddy with a car drive you. So save money by not getting a car. And then you mentioned like people wanting to do 20. Every now and then I scroll on TikTok and there's like this trend of like brand new privates, and maybe you've seen it, where it's like one slide is what they wanted to do when they first joined. The next slide is everything that happened and then like getting out. And like every single private is like, I want to go to air assault, ranger school, do 20, hit 7 and 7. And then the next slide is like 2 Article 15s, 2 divorces, 4 kids, like med board. And I'm just thinking to myself, who's joining? And the first year, when you're still like a fuzzy and mosquito wing E2, is like, I want to do this for 20 years. It was not me, dude. I was like, maybe I'd reenlist, but 20? A lot of things can happen in 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, a mutual friend of ours has been in for 13 or 14 years now, I think. And they're still going back and forth on whether they're going to stay for those few years that are left.
If you're that close, if you're at like 15, and I know 5 years is a long time, and I know 5 years probably at that kind of level of leadership is much different than like what we experienced. I would just ride it out. Like one of my buddies, my good buddies, who's E7 EOD, so bomb unit. He can retire in 4 years, dude. And I'm just thinking of it. I'm like, dude, I would have been able to retire at 20 in like 4 or 5 years, and I would have been like 40 with 80 or 100% disability, your pension, and then you can do whatever you want. But back then, 10 years ago, I was like, no way on earth could I make it 20? I was like, I don't even know if I could make it to PT the next day, dude. Like, I hated it, dude.
Yeah, it's just not for some people. I thought, early on, I'm like, oh yeah, I could do this. And then, like at the 2.5 year mark, I was like, no, absolutely not for another 17 years.
No. And the thing is like, it really just depends. Like it's entirely luck. It's like a card game. Like you could get dealt a really good hand and 15 years can fly by pretty easily for the most part. You could get your favorite duty stations. You could get stuck at Germany for 6 years. You could go to Italy for 2 years. You could get stationed at Fort Drum in New York, which is an hour away from your family. You could have really chill units where your unit commander signs off on, weekend passes for you to drive to another state. And then there's units where you're stuck in Fort Hood, Texas for 10 years, deploying every 2 years. Your unit, every Sunday, I can't tell you how many Sundays at Fort Sill I was called at like 6 a.m. because somebody was drunk driving after the strip club, and we would have to come in all day, 8 hours of PowerPoints. And I just remember thinking like, dude, why didn't you just call somebody? I would have woken up at 2 a.m. and picked you up. Like, why did you do that?
Yeah,
It just depends.
it's shocking how many times that happened, to be honest with you.
I remember not picking up sometimes too, because like I didn't wake up. And then I was getting yelled at. They were like, why didn't you answer your phone? I'm like, because it's 5 a.m. on a Sunday.
Yeah.
And they were
Yeah.
like, you always have to be ready. I'm like, damn, like, can we stop this? Can we stop the act for 1 minute and just, we're humans and it's Sunday? And they were like, no, that's not how this works.
Well, it's the whole shit rolling downhill thing, though, because the guy gets caught and then someone gets called. And then eventually it makes it to the commander who gets called at whatever
But
time
why
on a
does it have to
Sunday.
be mass punishment? Why is the military so fond of mass punishment? The person who did the drunk driving, make him sit through 10 hours of PowerPoints and smoke the crap out of him all day. But like, why do I have to get punished?
Yeah, I think that's just a cultural thing that has just continued to go on.
Yeah. I know dudes who would be like, oh, back in 95, it was way worse. And I'm like, okay, all right, dude. Just relax, dude. But yeah, that was also a huge deciding factor is like, dude, and it something tweaks like in like a dark corner of my memory when I watch these videos of like a recruiter on Instagram being like, you get 35 days off a year and all weekends. And dude, something like snaps. Like, that movie with the dude who plays, have you seen the newer X-Men movies?
No, I haven't.
Bro, have you seen the movie where he's just like, that wasn't me, that was Patricia?
What are you talking about?
Anyway, something snaps in my head where I get so mad because like these are white lies that recruiters give you where they're like, you have every federal holiday off and you have all weekends off. Dude,
Yeah, there needs to be
I,
an asterisk down at the bottom of that statement
bro,
that goes,
like experiences may vary. Like I can't tell you how many times, Sunday we'd have to go for DUI training all day. Saturday I would be cleaning all my equipment and packing it up because Monday we had inspection for no reason, right? So I would have to spend hours scrubbing sweat stains and dirt out of my vest. Or you'd be running errands like I'd have to go pick up my greens from the dry cleaner. Like it was never a full weekend of relaxation. Or you were doing
no,
staff duty. Or you
no,
got it
or
on a
that. Yeah,
Saturday.
that was the
And that
best part.
means, yeah, you got it on a Saturday so that you didn't even get a full day off during the week. So it's, there were a lot of factors where I was like, life could be a lot better. And I think a lot more people would re-enlist if they just not it doesn't have to like embrace the suck every day forever. How about like Monday through Friday embrace the suck, and then on the weekends they're like it'll suck a little less. Yeah, man. I saw a video on TikTok. I think it was like an E7 or E8 who had retired. And I feel like these people don't get it, right? I feel like when you get to a certain level or you stay in a certain amount of time, you like don't understand. It's like the equivalent of like a VP or SVP at corporate. Like they don't see eye to eye with the average worker, right? And he was like, I don't understand why all you guys are getting out at 6 years and 8 years and 10 years and 12 years. He's like, why not just do 20? And get the retirement. I remember thinking like that in certain situations. Like I remember being like an E3, E4, and there were a lot of E6s and E7s who were getting out. And they were like, I've been in 14 years, I've been in 15 years. And I asked them, I was like, Sergeant, why don't you just do 5 more years for the retirement? But bro, every year it's like Interstellar. They're like, 1 week enlisted is 5 years. 5 years on my body and mind. And
Yeah.
dude, they were just done.
That's a great way to describe what that feeling is like. Everything, it just seems like there is an eternity in front of you of hating everything that you're doing, and you're like, I can't do 5 more years. There's no way, let alone 15.
Dude, I remember there were 2 things that I did almost every day in the Army that I distinctly remember. One was every day I got home, I parked in my little like carport. It wasn't a garage, but it was like a little roof. You just park under it. And I sat in that car for at least 15 minutes, just sitting there and like letting everything wash away from the day where I was just like, yeah, this sucks. And then the second thing was every morning when my alarm went off at some like ungodly hour, like 5:20, I would just hit snooze and I would stare at the ceiling of my bedroom for like 5 minutes, working up the ability to be like, man, 111 more days. And then you get to PT, it's freezing, right? It's like 20 degrees, 30-mile-an-hour wind chill, 6 a.m. You know, your first sergeant is up in his office, 20 plus minutes as you guys are shivering. And then he just comes down. He's like, no pants today. We're doing shorts. I'm just like, dude, it's 20 degrees. Like, what, who are we doing this for?
Yeah, I definitely feel like there's some kind of weird dynamic where it's like, we gotta do something to amp this up. Running 7 or 8 miles is not enough. Let's make them freeze too. It's like, what are we proving by doing this?
You have to be cold and in pain, not just one or the other.
It's one thing, to be doing something like that out of necessity. And I'm sure there's someone somewhere who will be like, you have to do that stuff so that your mind is toughened and so that your body can handle it. And it's like, well, if we could do it here and people didn't collapse and die, I'm pretty sure we could do it in a scenario that's full of adrenaline and necessity and need instead of for no particular reason at all.
Yeah, I remember First Sergeant came down one of those mornings. I was violently shivering while standing there. And it was one of those like impulsive shivers. Like I didn't even realize I was shivering, right? And he looked at me and he was like, are you cold? And I knew what that meant.
Oh man, that's the one question that
if I said yes, he would have smoked the shit out of me, making me do push-ups and jumping jacks and sprinting to warm up. So I was just like, no, Top.
It was like, what? Are you having a seizure then? Knock off your bodily functions that are happening voluntarily right now.
Yeah. So that was good times. Anything else you wanna bring to attention?
Well, if anyone watching this has some interesting stories about things that they dealt with when they got out, worst advice you got, whether it came from someone while you were in or after you were out, let us know in the comments.
Yeah. Worst advice you got, funny stories, bad repressed memories of you being cold and not being able to wear normal, pants in the winter. Leave a comment. I'll laugh at it and then I'll comment something funny back and we can laugh together at the pain. We'll see you guys next time.